Neith is a much more complex goddess than is commonly believed. Ancient texts only hint at her true nature, one that the ancient Egyptians themselves believed was never fully uncovered. She was a major goddess at the very beginning of historical Egypt. Her cult is truly ancient even by Egyptian standards. She was almost certainly worshipped as a great creator goddess as early as Copper Age, although many believe her cult began in the shadows of Neolithic. The pharaonic religion, its theologies, for 3,000 years often developed somewhat omitting the great mother goddess Neith, but never completely excluded her. Other powerful goddesses were identified with her, heavenly mothers, always those of the highest status, those most venerated ones. Among them were Neith, Wadjet, Hathor, Mut and Isis. In the cults of these universal goddesses, the memory of Neith always resounded. This special connection was more or less emphasized in different periods. Her universality is defined by the multitude of attributes, features she possessed. Dangerous, the terrifying one, goddess of war, symbol of thunders, but also patroness of weaving, lady of floods, and protectress of the dead, their bodies and souls, lady of the sky. Traditionally, she was seen as the creator of all deities, mother of the gods. The act of creation performed by Neith was associated with the appearance of the first light amidst the vast, still, and dark waters of the primeval ocean Nun. She is the cosmic mother of light, entitled the one who shines in the Nun, when the earth was still in darkness. Neith was the one who begins the existence when the existence had not yet appeared. She was said to be the first and foremost creator who made the universe and all that it contains, and to govern its functioning as the great protector. As in case of the other great demiurges, there was no place for a consort in her story, and was believed to be able to give birth without the help of a man, the only Egyptian goddess never being subordinate to any male deity. The Virgin Mother Goddess, the unborn, who gave birth when there was no birth yet, the only one who has become the hundreds of thousands. Neith the Great, the God's Mother, the Great Queen of Egypt. This is perhaps the only Egyptian goddess whose cult lasted continuously for over 3,500 years, sometimes as an all-powerful supreme deity of the pantheon, and sometimes as just a local goddess, patroness of her faithful city of Sais in the Nile Delta. Goddess of war, warrior lady from the north, proudly wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt, holding a bow and arrows in her hands, ready to defend the restless frontier from Libyan raids. Undoubtedly, she was patroness of all the inhabitants of the Western Delta. Hello everyone, my name's Irena. Welcome to my channel, Ancient Sites Girl. I invite you to a podcast about the history of ancient Egypt. Today I'll tell you about the cult of the goddess Neith, a bit forgotten today, but definitely one of the most important pharaonic deities. Where really and when did Neith begin to be worshipped? What was her role at the beginning of historical Egypt, and how did her cult evolve until late antiquity? What did great classical thinkers like Plato, Herodotus or Plutarch write about her? To answer these questions, as always, I'll reach for ancient texts, not only Egyptian ones. Due to the lack of prehistoric texts, we cannot fully grasp the depth of meaning this goddess held for her worshippers. Analyzing the historical literature of ancient Egypt, it seems that Neith was part of a primeval, almost universal tradition of the mother goddess cult. As is known, the earliest manifestations of art in many prehistoric cultures include primitive female figurines with often emphasized sexual characteristics. These cults undoubtedly predate the male fertility cults associated with agriculture, so popular in dynastic times. It seems that the oldest Egyptian ideas about the birth of the sun, that is, the original version of solar cosmogony, concern the primordial mother, the divine woman, or the heavenly cow as the mother of all gods. There's evidence of the existence of a prehistoric religion or cult in Egypt as early as the 6th millennium BC, when today the desert areas resembled more of a savanna and semi-nomadic cattle herders ritually buried their cows and erected monuments in their honor. Under the sands of Nabta Playa in southern Egypt, crude megalithic stone structures from that time have been found, including what's considered to be the oldest known sculpture in Egypt. It depicts a cow. The primordial goddess, the creatrix in the form of a cow, was worshipped in dynastic Egypt, for example Bat, Mehet-Weret, Nut, Hathor, Hesat, and one of the oldest, Neith. Regardless of syncretism taking over of insignia and various roles in later myths, these goddesses are certainly, above all, manifestations of the one great cosmic mother. Pre-dynastic beliefs and rituals concerning birth, death, and resurrection were always associated with goddesses. The roles of these goddesses were most often assumed by male deities, with whom it was easier to identify the male rulers, consolidating under their leadership the nomes, the Egyptian city-states of pre-dynastic times. In the so-called Gertsen period, also known as Nakada II, paintings on vessels indicate that before 3200 BC, cults known to us from later dynastic times flourished. Among the recognizable divine symbols, the parts of pottery are decorated with a symbol of the fertility god Min, the falcons of Horus, and the symbol of the goddess Neith, resembling two crossed arrows tied with a rope to a pole. The oldest known example of her symbol found in Upper Egypt, the prehistoric artist placed on the picture of the boat as its standard. Perhaps it symbolizes a journey to the Nile Delta, or a clash with the northern enemy. We simply don't know. Also, the deciphering of her symbol is still an unresolved issue. A shield or two bows and arrows crossed on them, researchers most often claim. Neith is often armed with such attributes in later New Kingdom representations. She was also shown with a symbol on her head, which was supposed to represent two joined bows in a sheath, which justified her title Lady of the Bows. She often carries a bow and arrows and wears the crown of Lower Egypt, but like a man, directly on her head, and not like other goddesses on top of a wig. Her hair is not visible at all in such a combination. This is an image of a fearless warrior. But was she really so? Others see her pre-dynastic symbol as the weaving shuttle. We know that Neith is also the goddess of weaving, mostly responsible for the creation of mummification bandages. On the other hand, as a goddess of war, Neith was supposed to make weapons for warriors, and when they died, she guarded their bodies from destruction before they were found and buried. The end of the pre-dynastic period was a time of political turmoil and numerous war campaigns. Neith, as a war deity, certainly met the needs of the people of those times, and this seemed to be her main function. There's no doubt that in her original cult center, the city later known as Sais, Neith was the supreme, and some would say even the only goddess. Sau, called Sais by the Greeks, was the main center of the eastern delta, situated on the eastern bank of the canopic branch of the Nile. The city was the capital of the 5th and later the 4th nome of Lower Egypt. The earliest depiction of what is considered an Egyptian temple or a sanctuary in general is associated with the cult of Neith. Although she's always been linked with Sais, the drawing was found in Abydos, in Upper Egypt. The ivory decorated with it was found at the burial site of King Aha, most likely the second ruler of a unified Egypt, who reigned in the 31st century BC. It shows a walled complex, at one end of which is a roofed hut, and in front of it stands a large totem with the symbol of the goddess. 2 flagpoles at opposite ends indicate the sacredness of the site, looking like later hieroglyphs meaning Nedjer, divinity. Numerous fragments of pottery depicting Neith's symbols have been discovered throughout Egypt. Either her cult was therefore widespread and universal, or it always referred not to Neith but to the Nile Delta, which she may have simply symbolized. It was when many small city-states were consolidated into one kingdom that the multiplicity of cults had to be brought into order. From about 3100 BC, in unified Egypt, as one of the most popular deities, Neith was incorporated into the state cult as a special protector of the royal family. But it was the queens of the first dynasty who had the closest relation with her, incorporating her name into their own and supervising her cult. Until late antiquity, she was most often shown with the crown of Lower Egypt, Deshret. It's commonly believed that Neith personified the north, the entire Nile Delta, mostly before unification. Like the cobra goddess Wadjet, with whom she was strongly identified, she was considered the protector of the Red Crown and the kings of the north. The evolution of the pharaonic state cults was always strongly conditioned by politics. When Narmer took the Red Crown, he took with it all the powers of the conquered royal house, wealth, titles, but also a new divine patron. Neith's power was now universally recognized in the 2 lands, and the royal family actively participated in serving her cult. A new temple was therefore built for her in the new capital of the empire, Memphis. An important political undertaking of the founders of the first dynasty was the establishment of a new capital on the natural boundary of Upper and Lower Egypt, at the point where the delta and the long valley of the Nile of Upper Egypt meet. The city's patron was the great demiurge, the all-powerful and all-encompassing Ptah. Neith could be considered his female aspect, as many of the characteristics of Ptah were attributed to her. Ptah, who is south of his wall. His famous Memphite temple, called by the Greeks Aegyptos and by the Romans Aegyptus, gave the Western world a modern name of the country, Egypt. However, already in the time of the first dynasty, the city housed a second important sanctuary, the temple of the goddess Neith, who is north of her wall. Narmer, as soon as he took control of the Nile Delta, seems to have entered into a diplomatic marriage with a woman from the defeated royal house. She was probably from Neith's main city and cult center, Sais, and most likely her priestess. This marriage may have been part of a wider political consensus. Perhaps all the queens of the first dynasty were women from the lower Egyptian royal family. Neith-hotep, whose name meant Neith is merciful, was given all the royal prerogatives she deserved, including her own Serek, the predecessor of later royal cartouches, a special variant of the Horus name, which in the case of the queen was topped by the divine standard of Neith. It seems that the position of the first pharaohs wasn't as strong as previously believed, and they had to share power with their wives. Neith-hotep's huge mastaba discovered in Nagada was long considered to be the tomb of the legendary Narmer. Some of the early queens had tombs as large or larger than those of male rulers. At least two prominent First Dynasty queens, Neith-hotep and Merit Neith, had a serek topped with the symbol of Neith. This suggests that the early royal consorts held a much stronger position than their successors in subsequent centuries, comparable even to the power of a pharaoh. Neith-hotep's successors identified themselves with the goddess. Among the names of the queens of the First Dynasty, we have Her-Neith, Nacht-Neith, and Merit-Neith, whose name means beloved of Neith. The latter was the consort of King Jet, and the only royal woman to possess a double mortuary complex in the royal necropolis in Abydos, as well as an impressive mastaba and her own sandbar at Saqqara. She acted as regent for her infant son, Den, and many believe Merit Neith was the first female ruler of a unified Egypt, paving the way for future female pharaohs such as Sobek-Nefru in the 12th dynasty, 18th century BC, or Hatshepsut in the 18th dynasty, from the 15th century BC. Affixing the symbols of the all-powerful warrior goddess to their seal, and perhaps directly identified with her, the queens of the First Dynasty must have been among the most powerful women in the early Bronze Age world. The oldest known anthropomorphic representation of Neith was found on a diorite vase of King Ninetjer from the 2nd dynasty. The vase was found in the undergrounds of the step pyramid of Djoser in Saqqara, which was partially built over the older, early dynastic royal galleries. Everything indicates that already in the 2nd dynasty, the political position of the pharaohs was increasing and the role of their wives decreasing. The evolution of state theology at the threshold of the Old Kingdom leads us to the following conclusions. The followers of Horus from Upper Egypt, who were politically triumphant over the two lands, had to ally with the powerful center of the solar cult in Iunu, that is in Heliopolis, the 13th nome of Lower Egypt. The fruit of the alliance was, among other things, the introduction of a new state cult, a syncretic falcon god of the sun, Ra-Horachti, or Horemakhet Khepri Ra-Atum. The great importance of Neith for the queens of Egypt is further confirmed by the symbolism found on the gold-covered chair of Queen Hetepheres, mother of the great Khufu from the 4th dynasty. But in the times of the Great Pyramids, her position weakened considerably. It seems that the powerful solar goddesses took Neith's place, especially Bastet and Hathor, who divided the northern and southern skies between themselves. These new patronesses of the queens, like the pharaohs themselves, already in the time of Khafre, that is in the 26th century BC, became merely children of the all-powerful sun god. Neith rarely appears in the pyramid texts. She wasn't originally associated with death and resurrection like Nut or Isis, but was more associated with the world of the living, symbolizing rather the authority, power, and politics. Unlike the deities of Heliopolis, she didn't become part of the new religion of Osiris. In short, Neith didn't enter the Great Ennead, the group of the first 9 gods, born according to Heliopolitan theologians of Atum in the first time, Zeb Tepi. The lack of symbols for vowels in ancient Egyptian writings doesn't allow us to state for sure how the name Neith was pronounced. Its meaning is also controversial to this day. although most researchers lean towards the terrifying one. The name was supposed to mean frightening, dangerous, rather than malicious or evil. Although Neith lost her position in the late Old Kingdom, she reappeared in the Middle Kingdom coffin texts, in which magical spells allowed the dead to use the power of the terrifying Neith. Separated from the state cult, Neith begins to drift towards the cult of the dead, playing an increasingly important role in funeral rites. She becomes the opener of the ways, a guide and protector of souls wandering through the kingdom of Osiris. Together with Isis, Nephthys, and the scorpion goddess Selket, she guards the royal sarcophagi and canopic jars in the tombs, containing the organs of the mummified. The 13th dynasty of the Middle Kingdom saw the huge popularity of the crocodile Sobek, a solar warlike deity associated with the Nile, till then worshipped mainly in the vast Fayum oasis. The favorite name of the kings of the time became Sobek Hotep, that is, Sobek is pleased. Sobek was considered a manifestation of the sun and the son of the primordial mother Neith. Her association with crocodiles and water is repeated in several spells in the coffin text. For example, in spell 407, we read, "The crocodile goes forth from under the heights of Neith and from under the river banks." Neith again becomes associated with flood waters. In some statues from a much later period, Neith is even depicted as a woman with the head of a crocodile, so her association with the dangerous reptile wasn't forgotten. In the aforementioned Fayum, Neith was also depicted as a hippopotamus. Her other aquatic animal was the giant Nile perch, which could grow to the size of a man and weigh over 400 pounds. The goddess appears in fish form in the account of her act of creation, known to us from the texts of the Esna temple from Roman times, to which we'll return later. Neith, a goddess of a dual nature, both warrior and nurturer, is therefore symbolically associated with the bee. The great temple of Neith at Sais was called the House of the Bee. The bee was one of the national symbols of Lower Egypt, while the sedge was the symbol of Upper Egypt. These two symbols appear together, indicating the joint nature of the country. Her most important animal form, however, is the celestial cow Mehet-Weret, that is, Great Flood. In her cow form, Neith was most often shown with a line of stars down her back, in contrast to Nut's depictions with stars on her belly. Partially submerged in the primordial ocean of Nun, the cow represents the complete ecliptic circle around the sky. This symbol is seen as the sky enclosed by the celestial vault above and the cosmos below the horizon. Neith personifies the universal sky and the cosmos beyond the horizon, while the high-held goddess Nut represents only the visible vault of heaven. Neith, worshipped in her Sais, was seen as the personification of the universe, the sky, the earth, and the surrounding cosmic primal ocean, like Amun or Ptah of the New Kingdom. This perhaps earliest notion of Neith was explicitly described relatively late in the text of the massive stone sarcophagus of the 19th dynasty king Merenptah from the 13th century BC, where she is called the mother of the main gods of the time, Ra and Osiris. However, the most complete description of Neith as the great demiurge, the panentheistic supreme being, comes from a much younger source, namely the texts inscribed on the walls and columns of the hypostyle hall of the temple in Esna, in Upper Egypt, a temple of which she was patroness together with her male counterpart, the god Khnum-Ra. In this description of Neith from Roman times, mainly from the reigns of Domitian and Trajan, the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, the priests incorporated the much earlier traditions of Sais, resulting in the Theology of Esna. We read, "She has come as the unique, and she has become the hundreds of thousands." The creation myth of Esna presents Neith emerging as a cow from the primeval waters of Nun and calling the first land into being. She does this by issuing a command, like the Memphite Ptah uses the word that was in the beginning. The peace of the motionless cosmic primordial ocean is disturbed by the light of the goddess. It becomes a light that breaks the primeval darkness. To Neith, she who shines in Nun when the earth was still in darkness, we read. She changed her form, and she went as that. She lit up the rays of her eyes. Thus light came about. Then she said, "Would that I had a place as ground within Nun, on which I might repose." Neith then manifests as a serpent, in the eyes of the Egyptians an animal that always represents the primordial form of life. She becomes the luminous Urias, her perfect manifestation. We read, "The mother Urias, who came about in the beginning, Neith the great, mother of God, lady of Esna since the beginning, she who birthed the children, father of fathers, mother of mothers, who emerged in the beginning, since the time of the primeval ones, the living ancestor serpent who poked her head out of Nun." In Esna, the great creator god was worshipped in two forms, the male Khnum and the female Neith, but according to the Esna texts, both of them have androgynous features, as befits the Egyptian self-created first gods. Already in the Thutmosite funeral book, Amduat, the name Neith was written using the determinative symbol of phallus. In the New Kingdom, the mother goddess Mut was identified with Neith and was also sometimes depicted as an ithyphalic goddess. In Esna, we read, "You are the lady of Sais, whose 2/3 are masculine and 1/3 is feminine, father of the fathers and mother of the mothers. The divinity who came into being was in the midst of the primeval waters, having appeared out of herself while the land was in twilight, and no land had yet come forth, and no plant had yet grown. She illuminated the rays of her 2 eyes, and dawn came into being. Then she said, 'Let this place become land for me in the midst of the primeval water, in order that I might rest on it.' And this place became land in the midst of the primeval water, just as she said. And thus came into being Esna and Sais. Then she was pleased with this mount, and thus Egypt came into being in jubilation." The cosmogony of Esna then describes the transformation of Neith from the primordial serpent into Mehet Weret, the cosmic cow with a line of stars on its back, immersed in the cosmic primordial ocean. The cosmos is now ready for a new phase, the birth of the sun. In Esna, the crocodile is the manifestation of the child god, known as Sobek Ra. After the birth, the goddess announces that Ra will be the ruler of Egypt, and that from his tears, humanity will arise. From the umbilical cord of the child, thrown by her into the waters of Nun, the gigantic serpent Apep arises, a violent and chaotic enemy of the sun, a powerful being personifying absolute evil. Quote, "She removed the umbilical cord from her son, and she put it in the Nun waters. Thus came about a snake of 120 cubits, who is called Apep. His heart conceived rebellion against Ra, along with his associates, who came forth from his eye." Neith is thus a neutral creator, generating both order and chaos. But most importantly, after she has created the world and set it in motion, she chooses the side of order so that creation may ultimately triumph over chaos. The discarded body part retains divine power and poses a direct threat to its original divine source. In the superstitious Egyptians' view, any matter that comes out of the body is potentially dangerous in a spiritual sense. Their negative associations concerned primarily saliva and feces, but also blood, urine, sweat, and even fragments of hair and nails. One of the best examples is the well-known myth about Isis and the name of Ra, according to which Isis used the saliva of the sleeping old sun god to create a deadly poisonous snake that threatened the life of the creator. Isis stopped its venom in exchange for revealing to her the secret name of Ra, knowledge that gave her power over all magic. The aforementioned umbilical cord is no less potentially dangerous. Evil arises as a side effect of the act of creation, the effect of the unplanned action of the creator. In the Egyptian vision of the universe, evil was part of the cosmos from its very beginning. It didn't appear only later with the rebellion of humanity. Moreover, according to the texts of Esna, the future rebellion of humans against her son was foreseen by Neith and therefore sealed from the very beginning. According to Osirian myths, the first to disturb the cosmic order and balance, the divine law of Mut, established by the Creator, was the youngest of the gods of the Great Ennead, Seth. He treacherously annihilated Osiris, his brother, who ruled on earth justly, then usurped his power, provoking a great war among the gods. The Egyptians learned this story in many versions during the mystery scenes played at festivals, and over time, the myth became almost canonical. The most complete description comes from the Ramazid Chester Beatty papyrus, which I have often quoted. It gives an extremely colorful account of the trial before the tribunal of the gods, between Seth and the legitimate son of Osiris, the young Horus. According to the source, this trial, interrupted by duels, lasted 8 years and ended only as a result of the direct intervention of Osiris, who was already a powerful lord of the afterworld. The text is profane a little bit. The important gods are described in it as childish, obscene, and ridiculous, and it was probably a work to be read more for entertainment than a religious document. However, the only deity that the author treats with absolute respect is the goddess Neith, whom he calls the eldest, the mother of the gods, who shone on the first face. The story begins with the tribunal deciding on the validity of the claims of the young Horus. This motion was immediately backed by his supporters, Thoth and Horus's mother, Isis, but the chairman of the tribunal, Ra-Horachti, wasn't willing to comply, since Seth was his favorite and a companion in his nocturnal journeys through the afterlife. Seth had other supporters as well, and one of them, the ram-headed Bene-Gesserit of Mendes, proposed that the case be adjourned until the opinion of the great mother of the gods could be obtained. Quote, Do not have us exercise our authority ignorantly. Let a letter be sent to Neith the Great, the god's mother. As for what she will say, we shall do it." The Ennead said to Benebjeda, the great living god. It's the first time that they have been judged in the One Are the Truth's court. Then the Ennead said to Thoth, in the presence of the Universal Lord, "Please compose a letter to Neith the Great, the god's mother." A following letter was sent by Ra to Neith. "I, your humble servant, spend all night on Osiris's behalf consulting the two lands every day, while Sobek endures forever. What shall we do for these two individuals who have been in the tribunal for 80 years now, but neither of whom can be judged? Please write us what we should do." Since Neith is their mother, the gods write to her asking for advice and guidance. The goddess soon gave a clear answer. "Award the office of Osiris to his son, Horus. Don't commit such blatant acts of iniquity which are illegal, or I shall become so furious that the sky will touch the ground. The Universal Lord, the bull who resides in Heliopolis, ought to be told that enrich Seth in his possessions. Give him Anath and Astarte, your two daughters, and install Horus in the position of his father Osiris." Her judgment is clear. She created the world so that stable and just rule would strengthen Mut, and thus the balance of the universe. In order to end the dispute and satisfy Seth's ambition, she offered him compensation in the form of wealth for the lost throne and 2 foreign goddesses as wives. This sensible proposal was eagerly supported by the Ennead, who was clearly bored with the fruitless deliberations. Although her voice wasn't decisive, Horus and Isis had to fight for justice for a long time. The myth reminds us of the seemingly forgotten Great Mother Goddess, who in the consciousness of the Egyptians of the New Kingdom still held the position of the greatest authority, the last instance. The second intermediate period saw the collapse of the powerful cult of Amun-ra, which was now limited to the Theban region. 400 years of political unrest were accompanied by a great flourishing of local cults, folk religiosity, as well as zealotry. The importance of the once powerful goddesses increased in particular, such as the cat-headed Bastet, who became a special protector of the 22nd Libyan dynasty, and towards the end of this period, the great mother of the gods, Neith of Sais, was promoted by the founder of the 24th dynasty, Tefnakht, from the 8th century BC. When the princes of Sais finally became rulers of the whole country in the 6th century BC, Neith took the place of Amun-ra, the supreme state deity, and stood at the head of the pantheon as ruler of the gods. The pharaohs of the 26th, so-called Said dynasty, initially ruled at the mercy of the hated Assyrian occupiers. However, they soon became independent and began rebuilding a newly reunited country. The Egyptians of these difficult times recalled the days of Egypt's glory and decorated their tombs with old kingdom art and even fragments of the pyramid texts. The old great goddess fit perfectly into this trend. Her temples were renovated and new ones were built. The founder of the dynasty, King Psamtik, began expanding and improving the temple of his patroness. The work was continued by his successors and included major engineering feats, such as the carving of a gigantic naos from a single block of granite in a quarry in Aswan, which was supposedly transported across the country for 3 years. The Sais Renaissance was also the time of the first serious cultural encounter between the Egyptians and the Greeks, who, as a result of the great colonization, were experiencing a real explosion of their culture. The land of the pharaohs was then not only peacefully visited by numerous Greeks, but many of them also settled there permanently, most often as merchants and mercenaries. At the turn of 7th and 6th centuries BC, they were allowed to build their own autonomous city near Sais, now Kratis. The Hellenes of that time also made the first, far-fetched and maybe even too fancy, identification of the gods of both religions. In Amun, for example, they saw Zeus; in Ptah, the patron of craftsmen, Hephaestus; in Horus, Apollo; in Osiris, Dionysus; and in the virgin warrior Neith, Athena. There was indeed one thing that connected both goddesses. Both were women who didn't fit into the typical female features and functions. During the later times of Persian rule in the 5th century BC, the famous Greek philosopher Plato described Sais as follows. The citizens have a deity for their founder. She is named in Egyptian Neith, and is asserted by them to be the same whom the Hellenes call Athena. They are great lovers of the Athenians and say that they are in some way related to them. Greek travelers such as Plato, Herodotus, and Diodorus identified Neith or Neith-Isis with Athena. According to Plato, the sage Solon was supposed to have learned the history of Atlantis at Sais. The Greek historian of the 1st century BC, Diodorus Siculus, maintained that Athena built Sais before the Great Flood that supposedly destroyed Athens and Atlantis. While all the Greek cities sank in that catastrophe, the Egyptian cities, including Sais, were supposed to have survived and were considered a source of ancient knowledge about the nature of the universe. In 525 BC, Egypt fell to Persian invaders for the first time, establishing the Egyptian satrapy. The kings of the Achaemenid Empire ruled as the 27th dynasty. Initially persecuted, the cult of Neith was quickly restored and fully approved by the Persians. Both the victorious Cambyses II and Darius the Great, supporting a cult that was already critical for the Egyptians, anchored their rule in the religious tradition of Egypt. Their efforts are well illustrated by the inscription on the statue of a certain Uja-Horresnet, a high official and priest of Neith in Sais. Cambyses came to Sais. His Majesty went in person to the temple of Neith. He made a great prostration before Her Majesty, as every king has done. He made a great offering of every good thing to Neith the Great, the Mother of God, and to the great gods who are in Sais, as every beneficent king has done. His Majesty did this because I had let His Majesty know the greatness of Her Majesty Neith, that she is the mother of Ra himself. Cambyses, although he annexed Egypt as part of the Achaemenid Empire, officially crowned himself pharaoh in Sais, in the presence of a goddess to whom not only Egyptians and Persians bowed. An interesting account by Plato describes the festival of Neith in Libya. Quote, "They celebrate a yearly festival of Athena, where their maidens are divided into two groups and fight each other with stones and sticks, thus, they say, honoring in the way of their ancestors that native goddess, whom we call Athena. Maidens who die of their wounds are called false virgins. Before the girls are set fighting, the entire people choose the fairest maid and arm her with a Corinthian helmet and Greek panoply, to be then mounted on a chariot and drawn all along the lakeshore. With what armor they equipped their maidens before Greeks came to live near them, I cannot say, but I suppose the armor was Egyptian, for I believe that the Greeks took their shield and helmet from Egypt. The western neighbors of the Egyptians had already settled the northwestern delta in the early Bronze Age, which is why until recently scholars were generally convinced of Neith's possible Libyan roots. However, Egyptologists today agree that her cult was purely Egyptian from the beginning. During the Old Kingdom, the Egyptians were sometimes said to have called her Neith of Libya because she was the lady of the western frontier, a tireless warrior armed with a bow, guarding her people from the constant threat from the west. Other goddesses guarding other borders had a similar character. For example, the warrior guardian of Elephantine, Satet, she who shoots with her bow at the Nubian invaders. Neith was associated with the vast Libyan desert. The participants of the caravans, Egyptian, Libyan, and Greek, prayed to the Lady of the Desert for a successful and safe journey. With Alexander's conquest and the rule of the Ptolemies, Neith once again lost her position as the main state deity. Sais found itself in the shadow of the nearby new capital, Alexandria, and Neith had to give way to the new patron of the ruling dynasty, Serapis, but above all to the incredibly popular Isis, who quickly took over the roles and functions of all the other great goddesses of Egypt. Of course, ancient Sais remained Neith's stronghold, and her cult continued to flourish in the city. The cult's dynamics were added by the extremely popular among all Egyptians festival of the goddess, called by the Greeks Heortis Lychnokais, the festival of lamps for Neith in Sais, and its Upper Egyptian equivalent in Esna. It's not known how old it was, but the festival was described already in the 5th century BC by Herodotus. Quote, "At Sais, when the assembly takes place for the sacrifices, there is one night on which the inhabitants all burn a multitude of lights in the open air round their houses. They use lamps in the shape of flat saucers filled with a mixture of oil and salt, on the top of which the wick floats. These burn the whole night and give to the festival the name of the Feast of Lamps. The Egyptians who are absent from the festival observe the night of the sacrifice, no less than the rest, by a general lighting of lamps, so that the illumination isn't confined to the city of Sais, but extends over the whole of Egypt. And there's a religious reason assigned for this special honor paid to this night, as well as for the illumination which accompanies it. The night ceremony was held in and outside houses, which became a sacred space for the holiday. Performing ritual actions near or in the home space, especially before entrance, was an important feature of the religious life of the Egyptians. The lighting of the lamps commemorated the time when Isis had succeeded in regenerating Osiris's dismembered body through the power of light, and so the lamps were lit on the night of the full moon. Participants wanted to ensure Osiris's rebirth by lighting the lamps annually on the night of the 13th Epip, that is in the 3rd month of the Shemu season, around July. The main place of the ceremony was the symbolic tomb of Osiris, in the underground chapel beneath the temple of Neith at Sais, where lamps were carried in procession around the coffin of Osiris. With the help of light, which symbolized the life-giving power of the moon, Isis rekindled life in her dead husband Osiris. The lights were also to aid her in her nocturnal search for the body of Osiris. The Osirian public mysteries were held at the sacred lake of the Temple of Neith. This probably took place on the same night as the lighting of the lamps in Egyptian homes. So, the goddess Isis was worshipped at the sanctuary of Neith at Sais. Writing in the 2nd century AD, Plutarch reports, "They often call Isis by the name of Athena." Plutarch further writes, "In Sais, the statue of Athena, whom they believed to be Isis, bore the inscription, 'I am all that has been, and is, and shall be, and my robe no mortal has yet uncovered.'" Another author, Proclus, a Greek philosopher from the 5th century AD, translates this inscription from the Temple of Neith as follows: "I am all things that are, that will be, and that have been, and no mortal has ever me unveiled. The fruit which I brought forth was the sun." On the night of the festival, when the lamps were lit, Neith would draw back her veil, guiding the wandering souls of the dead to their true home with her light. Her veil is lifted not only for the dead, but also for those who are ready to experience her living light as it illuminates the mysteries of eternity. In the morning, the celebrations began in honor of Neith herself, the creator and mother of the sun. The day-long celebrations commemorated the return of the goddess in her boat after saving her son, Ra. With her bow, she was to defeat the enemies of the sun. In order to reunite with him, her statue was exposed to sunlight. In the morning, the high priest would announce her triumphal return, and then a solemn procession would set off. For the crowds of believers, the highlight of the festival was her public appearance, the Epiphany of the goddess. In the evening, the second part of the rituals took place, with a procession of worshippers behind a statue of the goddess in the form of a heavenly cow, solemnly decorated by priests. The image of Neith was carried to the city's waterfront and then returned with her triumphally to the temple. This symbolic return signified the final victory over the enemies of the sun and the end of the time of chaos, which was confirmed by her re-enthronement. The main festival of Neith was also held at the same time in the south, in Esna. We read, "Oh, here came in joy, Neith, the great cow, came in peace. Oh, for her arrival, the great Neith, the mistress of Esna, Menheit-Neptu, the mistress of Canto. The goddess and her Ennead appear at her temple, light the torches in great quantity inside the temple for men and women to make a festival, that this whole city gives shouts of joy, and no one went to sleep until dawn. Esna is in festival." In Roman times, Neith was worshipped both at Alexandria and at the other important port of the western delta, Heraklion, this famous today sunken city, as the patroness of sailors, the Lady of the Sea. Neith Minerva remained an important goddess of the Nile Delta until late antiquity, by which time many of the other ancient Egyptian gods had long been forgotten. It's hard to disagree with the opinion that the male gods were favored by the pharaonic state, placed at the top of the pantheon as the creators and rulers of all the gods. This was done for political reasons. The Egyptian idea of divine kingship was a way to unite the two lands under one strong leadership, a leadership with unquestionable authority. Religion served as the most effective tool for this, and since most kings were male, the pharaohs preferred to identify with male deities, of course. Hence the omnipotence of Horus, Ra-Horachte or Osiris over the hearts and minds of the Egyptians. However, when the Pharaonic Empire fell, its people preferred to gather around their divine mothers, such as Isis or Neith. When the great national gods, such as Amun-ra or Ptah, finally fell into oblivion, and Osiris was overshadowed by his wife, the cults of the great goddesses continued until the very end. I hope you learned something new about the beliefs of ancient Egyptians. Thank you for listening. Please let me know in the comments what you would like to hear about next time. I would also like to thank all my patrons. I truly appreciate your contribution. If you don't support me yet but would like to, I placed my Patreon link below in the description. Don't forget to like my video and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye and see you on the next one.